Chapter 4, Albert's Journal of the Universe. Fourth entry, Source Whisperer. September 2nd, 2045. Continued.
Nothing prepared us for the dynamic encounter that we would all have the next day cycle of our dream vacation. We had no real plans for our activities for the day. Our itinerary had not been planned, our intentions were not even being discussed. Everyone was content with just being in the moment. Thoughts, questions, poseurs, concepts, theories, calculations, and all left-brain logical thinking was temporarily shut down. As usual, it will be very difficult to place words or descriptions on the experience we were having. All sound was one sound vibrating complete. All vibrations were interconnected like a cosmic divine tapestry. Our dream vacation reality was engulfed with a spiraling energy field. We became part of the fabric within the tapestry. We realized our connection would be a more accurate statement. The density of our dream reality seemed to compress to form mass in yet another plane of existence. We found ourselves going through an even larger vortex that gently placed us on a world where we were but a speck. We entered a living being on this world as a compressed photon or hard light. The being that we entered seemed to have very little of what we consider brain activity. The senses of this being were very strong and it just reacted to outside stimulus in an instinctual manner. No emotions were attached to any reaction it had. We were like a spark of consciousness that awakened a part of this being, long dormant or possible totally unfamiliar to this reality. As a group photon, we managed to keep our chattering logical brain quite as we assimilated the surroundings we were in. Mary was very helpful in keeping the chatter to a minimum. As we accustomed ourselves, our host being was approached by another being that was attempting to harness the being we were now one with. Our host's first instinct was one of fight or flight, although our presence caused a different reaction as our host being stood still, gazing at this new opposing force. The beings cautiously approached one another, with the one aiming to dominate, now extending gestures of friendship towards our host. The words spoken by our host's advisor were audible as he drew near. Brandon assisted in understanding the language being used. The encounter between these beings no longer involved the intent of entrapment or forced submission to another's will. Instead, as they drew closer, a bond of friendship began to ignite. It was at this moment that we recognized some of our host's attributes, as we spread our vast wings and rose on our hind legs. What kind of being are we, many of us pondered. We quickly quieted our buzzing inquiries to fully immerse ourselves in the unfolding narrative. Unintentionally, we had already induced a change within our host, a simple alteration that would have profound impacts in this world we were exploring. Seth's expertise as a shapeshifter had aided us all in our ability to assume new forms without being overtaken by them. Without the intent of entrapment, a trust was silently created. This new trust had no master-servant relationship. The trust created a bond between these two beings that would mutually benefit both beings. This was a magical moment for this reality as both beings changed their perceptions of each other to create a relationship with each other that was well out of the conceptions of the others inhabiting this world. As our host befriended his former adversary, they began to journey together. Arriving at a vast lake with a smooth surface, we glimpsed our host's reflection for the first time during this adventure. In size, we are colossal compared to our new companion. We possess the strength to thwart any malicious advances, favoring actions that serve the interests of both parties. Our host decided to let her new friend mount her back, enabling us to traverse greater distances. Our new ally, the custodian of our shared trust, has pledged to uphold our bond with unconditional love. He names himself at land, and he refers to our host as Eunice. Part of our trust with Eunice is to make sure no harm comes from anything we may do or think. Eunice has taken on several new trust agreements as we have seen so far traveling with her. Our presence is barely known to her, but a trust had to be formed before we could enter. Her new trust with Atland would not happen with many of Atland's brethren. We could sense the ridicule that Atland had to take for not beating Eunice into submitting to his will. Eunice took notice of how her fellow species was enslaved and treated badly by the others of Atland's kind. She did this on her own without our help or influence, although we had some small impact on how she was reacting. Atland was known by his peers as a great sorcerer, or one in touch with Source. Those that ridiculed Atland did their slander behind his back. He would just laugh at their pettiness if he heard any of it. His laughter would reverberate loudly with a genuine tone of amusement. Rumors were around that Atland had bewitched Eunice into compliance and did not need a whip. A simple act of kindness can be construed in some very strange ways if they are not in line with what you believe. Both Eunice and At Land were the first of their kind to be something different, to act from inner guidance. This was perceived as magical to the blocked mind or from a lower perspective. Eunice realized that her kind, the Conformites, were the ones creating everything. The organites beings of At Land utilized her species for the majority of the labor involved in any task. Some Conformites even served as war creatures in the organites' battles. Confusion stirred within Eunice as she pondered. How could we let this happen? She also longed for her former state of unawareness of the injustice and primitive behavior, missing the bliss of ignorance. It was this very ignorance that led to the current state of affairs, prompting Eunice to resolve to make changes. The organites treated the Conformites like a commodity that they traded. The bargaining chip was the Conformites' willingness to comply with your wants and needs. Eunice was not worth much in their illusionary currency system. Eunice was perplexed at how to proceed with her new intent. Most of her kind was satisfied with their lives as slaves. Some of them even had really nice, comfortable pens to lock themselves in at night. All of her kinds were missing the spark that she had that day she met At Land. Eunice communicated with her fellow Conformites how they were much larger in stature than the Organites and greater in numbers. She communicated about her trust agreement with At Land and how it was mutually considerate of each other. She quickly got a reputation of being a rebel, so she was avoided by many. Her intent was getting harder to accomplish the harder she worked at it. One day Eunice spread her mighty wings and took us on a journey, with At Land on her back. Eunice communicated with At Land freely now, telling him about her experiences. We flew over the most breathtaking scenery one could only imagine. Not even in our dreamscape did we come close to some of the wonders and abundance on this world. Our soul group, once part of Eunice, maintained a trust pact of non-interference, yet we could sense her surge of emotions as she contemplated her liberty. Recollections of days spent roaming carefree flooded back to her. Reconnecting with nature, she found the solution to her dilemma, aiming to awaken her fellow Conformites to awareness. At Land revealed to Eunice that she had begun to heed the source whisperer within all living beings. He shared with Eunice that on the day they met, he too was attuned to his inner source whisperer and has since been guided by it. Their friendship, a precious offering from the source, surpasses any treasure in the world. The trust and bond they share is the most priceless treasure in existence. They understand that their union has created something more significant than any prior pact, even though the prospect of change is daunting. Disbelief does not negate truth. It's essential to give others the chance to discover truths independently. Offer a hint or suggest an alternate route, then step back. In time, they will approach you, enlightened by their newfound insights. Eunice felt rejuvenated after her nature excursion with At Land. She emerged with a renewed determination to detach herself from the pursuit of outcomes, choosing instead to act solely on her inner guidance. She resolved to accept counsel only from her source whisperer. Our soul group had to be extra careful now not to influence Eunice in her free will decision-making. We do not want to be mistaken as a higher source. Maybe we had already interfered too much, but we all believed that what happened in our first encounter was meant to happen. At times, Mary had her task full keeping the soul group quiet, about to strain itself. Each of us would react a different way, and it is hard watching others stumble about if you can help. We all had advice for Eunice, but we could not voice our advice without breaking our trust agreement of non-interference. If she knew we were part of her and asked for our advice then, as long as we are not recognized as a higher authority, we can answer. The problem is we cannot spark the knowledge of our presence without breaking the trust. As Eunice became aware of her identity and her connection to the source, she drew to herself others who shared this awareness. The concept of freedom needed to be reclaimed. Trust had to be rebuilt. We all need the liberty to direct our energy where we choose. The Consentites also had to adopt a new name. They would no longer be known as Consentites. With this fresh wave of consciousness, they were to be known as the non-Consentites. Change would not come easily, as the Organites were reluctant to relinquish their perceived control. Establishing trust and forming bonds were merely methods of dominance, serving no one's interests but their own. Eunice observed that the Organites had inadvertently become prisoners of their own struggle for power, enslaved by their convictions and egos. Despite being unable to achieve anything without the Consentites' assistance, the Organites clung to their delusion of control. At Land was now being perceived as a threat by his fellow Organites, as he introduced unparalleled ideas that were not in compliance to structured society. The self-appointed authorities went to the make-believe leaders to petition the capture of Atlan to silence him forever. Just his unusual relationship with Eunice was enough to prosecute Atlan for non-compliance. However, Atlan was true to his name's sake, drawing his energy from the universe around him. He stood on his ground with many others that supported their right to think and act freely, as long as no harm is committed. The Organites argued that Atlan was bringing harm to society if they lost control of the labor force that brings comfort to all Organites. Eunice was being held with Atlan in a quarantined area where they could not even talk to each other. We could all feel her despair as she searched inside for answers. Her thoughts went to the first meeting where she felt that spark that caused her to react so differently towards Atlan that day. Our soul group was surprised that Eunice had taken notice of us. We were nothing but an impulse, photon or neutron. Although she was aware of our initial impact, we have been very successful at keeping our presence unknown ever since. She referred to us as Spark.
I felt you enter me that day, Spark. You were no more than a flash of awareness. But I felt you and allowed your entry with an open heart. I am not sure why you are here or why I haven't heard from you since that day. I know that you are still with me, Spark. I feel that you are looking for answers also. Maybe we can renew our trust to include a mutual exchange for all. I am asking for your help.
Our soul group emerged from Eunice like a pin-sized point of light that quickly became larger. Our light sphere then opened up for us all to show ourselves as individuals to Eunice. We were all so excited. Scout, Jasmine, Charles, Brandon, and Penny were bursting with energy waiting to be unleashed. Mary had to help them release that energy in a constructive manner. One at a time, they gave their input on how we could help. Eunice was surprised at what was unfolding in front of her. She saw us leave her heart center as a photon of light, split into many photons, then take shapes of who we are. This is a lot to accept from anyone's imagination. Alone in the solidarity of her confinement, she was going crazy. Myra, as a healer, stepped up to Eunice to help settle her dis-ease. Mary also helped in explaining who we were along with our intent. Brandon made sure that everyone could communicate with no miscomprehensions. I was amazed at how we all played our roles in this unfolding or disclosure. We were now able to share the wisdom we were acquiring with a world that needed a spark of insight. The first thing we did was to re-establish the communication between Atlan and Eunice. Atlan understood our connection with Source. As a sorcerer, he traveled many cosmic pathways and has met guides from many realities. He welcomed us with open arms. Atlan also accepted us because we looked a lot like the Organites when we assumed our physical shape. Still, the question of how to enact change in a free will society with unwillingness to change was confronting us. Most all would recognize the benefit of a more heart-centered existence if they could only tap into the memories they had before their learned behavior set in. How do we get them to tap these memories? Atlan insisted that Eunice and his trial be made public. His captors did not want a public hearing in fear of releasing new thoughts to the population. Both Atlan and Eunice had friends that helped spread the opinion of having an open forum for all to listen. Crowds gathered around the hearing chamber questioning the assumed authority of the captors and petitioning the release of both Atlan and Eunice. First, the bloodthirsty captors brought Atlan out in chains in front of the crowd. A well-versed speaker spoke to the gathering masses. His rhetoric was well known as public opinion, so he did not expect much resistance.
I am Propagandius from the High Council. We bring before you this traitor Atlan who wishes to stop our world as we know it and allow for equality between two sets of beings, where one is obviously meant to be of service to us. This is how it has been for thousands of years, and it is still true today. The Consentites might surpass us in size and possess abilities we cannot equal, yet we hold a psychological edge with our technology and our capacity for creation and reasoning. We represent an evolutionary advancement in all things, including the Consentites are here to serve us. It is our fate to dominate. It is your fate to dominate. We must keep our agendas clear, without the muddled ideas of a quack conjurer and his rebel Consentite Eunice.
With these words, they brought Eunice out, also in chains. It was obvious that Eunice had been beaten. Our soul group felt the beatings that the Organites gave Eunice before this public display. Many of us had never experienced this kind of derogating treatment, so Mary and Myra helped healing the emotional wounds that got inflicted on us, as well as Eunice. Propagandius went on saying,
Look at this pathetic creature that Atlan risked his life for. Even with her grand stature, we have made her succumb into our servitude. We are truly the masters of our environment. Her memory of this beating will ensure us of a lifetime of loyalty. If we coddle to her, she will plan even more chaos. We are protecting you from that chaos.
All on her own, without the help or advice from our soul group, Eunice stood up proudly saying,
I have only one higher authority. That authority is my own personal source whisperer. This source whisperer is shared with all existence. So it is within everyone here. This includes my dear captor Propagandius, who has taught me that I am not this physical body. We are all so much more than what we believe we are. We are all part of one shared dream that can be shaped any way we choose. Thank you, Propagandius, for your lesson, but you did not teach me what you intended to teach me. No matter what you do, you cannot make yourself an authority over others unless they allow this. You do not have my consent, or my fear, or my compliance to your primitive mindset.
We could feel Eunice drawing energy from the universe within her as she spoke. Her love for Propagandius was genuine, and the crowd picked this up. We noticed a feeling of bewilderment as the crowd realized that Eunice had forever turned the tables on the Organites by showing the Organites' primitive behavior, therefore balancing the illusionary status of either race. There was no need for a violent uprising as Eunice's act of love brought along a new perspective. Both Atland and Eunice were released as Propagandius found his way safely away from the turning tides of change that did not hold him in favor. Our soul group vacationers all felt we were done here. Our experiences had a new twist to them, learning to be detached from experience that someone you have come to love as part of you is finding their own path. We all have our own source whisperer, and it whispers hints on our journey back to source. The great I am. Eunice followed us into the night sky, embracing our light as we made our departure. What was in store for us the next day of our vacation dream multi-universe was just as marvelous or enlightening as any experience we had so far. At this point, we all went through the rest cycle of our vacation. We closed today's dream journal reminded of our coexistence with the surroundings in our reality and the right for all life to thrive. Our reactions to whoever or whatever we have contact with and face determine our path in spiritual evolution.
I hope you enjoyed this latest dream journal sharing. As you continue to dream with us, please subscribe, like, and share to spread the spark that is creating a better existence.